Taft in the election of 1912. So, William Howard Taft is elected to replace Roosevelt as the Republican in office in 1908, takes office in 1909, and very early on his problems with the progressives begin over a variety of issues. The first issue is the tariff. There is a big debate in the Republican Party over whether or not a tariff is still needed. Remember, a tariff is used to protect infant industries, and American industries by 1909 are no longer considered infant. So many progressives feel that we don't need a tariff by 1909, that the tariff is just hurting American consumers. Conservatives, on the other hand, say, yes, we do need a tariff because it helps American businesses profit. It helps them compete. It helps them beat foreign competition. Taft sides with the conservatives in Congress and backs and supports and signs the Payne-Aldrich tariff, which many progressives felt was way too high. And as a result, he loses the support from the progressives in Congress. What do you think about that, Breck?
16.
Okay. So many of the progressives were upset about Taft's position on the tariff. Another area that Taft gets into trouble with the progressives is in conservation. Taft actually conserves more land than Roosevelt, but he supports the Secretary of Interior, Richard Ballinger's sale of millions of acres of land. Now, this idea was opposed by Gifford Pinchot, the head of the Forest Service, who Roosevelt worked so closely with. Taft sides with Ballinger. Taft fires Pinchot from the Forest Service, and this really upsets Roosevelt. And if you upset Roosevelt, you're going to make the progressives mad as well. So the Ballinger-Pinchot affair also turns the progressives against Taft. Another issue that Taft upsets the progressives in is in regulating corporations. We have the Mann-Elkins Act passed and signed by Taft, which gives the ICC even more power. It lets the ICC regulate not only railroads, but telephone and telegraph lines as well. This obviously makes the progressives happy. They want to see big businesses regulated and controlled. However, it has another element of the act that creates a commerce court. This is what businesses demanded. This is a special court created to hear appeals. This is a lot better for business. And as a result, progressives are upset over the inclusion of the Commerce Court in the Mann-Elkins Act. So again, progressives are upset with Taft. In 1910, we have a midterm election, and like normal, we can use the midterm election to gauge the public's opinion of how a president is doing. And the progressives beat conservatives, who were backed by Taft, resoundingly in the election of 1910. The tariff proves to be a big issue. Not only do progressives do well, but the Democrats do well also. They regain control of the House and the Senate for the first time since 1894. And they picked up 58 seats in the House and 10 total seats in the Senate. These conservative losses in 1910 really affect the type of legislation that we'll see in the second half of Taft's presidency. With more progressives and more Democrats in control of Congress, we see safety laws for mines and railroads passed by Congress. We see the Children's Bureau created by Congress to oversee child labor at the federal level. And we also see employer liability on all government contracts. In other words, if a business is doing work for the government, making something for the government or doing work for the government, some type of service, and somebody gets injured, the employer is liable for that. The employer has to pay the person who got injured. We also see an 8-hour workday instituted for all government workers. We're also going to see the start of 2 major progressive amendments to the Constitution. We're going to see that process begin in Taft's second half of his presidency. The first is the process begins for the 16th Amendment to become part of the Constitution. This is the amendment that creates the income tax. This is probably the second most democratic law created in the 20th century. It's a lot more democratic than the old method using a tariff to generate government revenue, because an income tax is a lot more fair way to collect taxes than a tariff. The 17th Amendment also begins while Taft is in office, and the 17th Amendment is the one that calls for the direct election of senators. This has been a major progressive goal since the start, and we'll see it start while Taft is in office. Taft tries to bust trusts like Standard Oil and American Tobacco. Taft doesn't like trusts. He's probably a lot more opposed to trusts than Roosevelt. However, the Supreme Court used what they called the rule of reason to decide whether these two trusts were good trusts or bad trusts. And they said they were both good trusts and can continue to exist. And this really upsets Taft. Taft then has the federal government sue U.S. Steel. And he's suing them for a business merger that had been personally approved by Roosevelt when Roosevelt was in office. This upsets Roosevelt so much that he decides that he is going to run for re-election in 1912. So let's talk about the election in 1912. Taft and Roosevelt are both fighting for the Republican nomination, but Taft is the incumbent president. He's the one in office. That means he has the advantage. He's going to control the party convention, and as a result, Taft wins the nomination. However, Roosevelt is so popular that a group of progressives form the Progressive Party, and they nominate Teddy Roosevelt as their candidate. Roosevelt, upon hearing that he had been nominated by this third party, says, "I'm as happy as a bull moose." So sometimes this party is referred to as the Bull Moose Party. Woodrow Wilson is the Democratic candidate. He is also a progressive. He's the former governor of New Jersey. And in the election, we have very different political ideologies. Taft represents the much more conservative ideology, more often siding with business than the other two, not talking about major significant change. Roosevelt calls his program New Nationalism. He wants to take a national approach to solving problems, and that starts with having a strong president. He believes in the federal government growing in power. He's open to using more experts. He's okay with a larger federal bureaucracy. He wants a social justice program to protect workers and protect women and protect children. And again, he believes in good trusts. He says big unions and big corporations are okay if they serve the people. But we need a strong president to control these powerful forces. Wilson's program is different. He calls it New Freedom. Wilson is more about business competition. He wants a small federal government. Only use federal power when absolutely necessary. He has the same social justice goals as Roosevelt, but he just wants to see those achieved at the state and local level and less often at the federal level unless absolutely needed. He also wants a more free, competitive economy, not one that is as planned and guided as Roosevelt is talking about. So both Teddy Roosevelt and New Nationalism and Woodrow Wilson's New Freedom are trying to address the effects of economic growth on individuals and on society. Both want a change to the bureaucracy. They want to see more experts in there. Both want to use government power to protect the ordinary citizen, although at different levels of government power. And Roosevelt feels that federal power and national planning and business growth is the way America is going to prosper. Taft does not really campaign in the election of 1912. Some people say he basically gave up. Roosevelt campaigns vigorously. He's supported by women. He's supported by some labor organizations and business leaders. Woodrow Wilson campaigns as well. And in the end, having the Republican vote split between Roosevelt and Taft proved to be their undoing. This map, like a lot of the maps we've looked at this year, is completely backwards, and the Democrats for some reason are in red. So if you look at the red states, you can see that the Democrats won handily in the electoral vote, but it was a direct result of the Republican vote being split between two candidates. So Wilson wins in 1912 and will take office in 1913. Let's make sure we read 675 to 680. It's not as long as it sounds. You're going to read the section entitled The New Freedom in Action and Wilson Moves Towards New Nationalism. That will give you an overview of the policies that were put into place when Woodrow Wilson was in office, and you'll get an idea of some of his progressive reforms.